I still remember the sound of the wind that day. It didn't howl, it screamed. It screamed like the mountains themselves knew what was about to happen. The air was thin up there in Colorado, the kind that makes every breath feel earned. We had driven 3 hours out of Denver for what was supposed to be a quiet weekend, just the three of us. My husband, David, our son, Ethan, and me, Claire. I thought it was a chance to heal us. I thought families could still be fixed. I was wrong. Ethan wasn't the boy I'd raised anymore. His eyes had changed, colder, detached. There was a kind of calculation in them, the same one David used to have when he was working on his engineering blueprints late into the night. Only Ethan's calculations weren't about structures. They were about people. About us. He had invited us to that mountain cabin himself. Said he wanted to talk. Said he missed the old times. And I believed him. Because that's what mothers do. They believe their children, even when they shouldn't. We reached the cabin just before sunset. The light painted everything gold. The trees, the deck, even Ethan's smile. But it didn't reach his eyes. Dinner was awkward. David tried to joke, but Ethan barely responded. He was somewhere else, inside his head, turning something over. A plan, maybe. At one point, he looked at me and said softly, "You know, Mom, sometimes people hold on to things they shouldn't." I thought he was talking about the past. About the arguments we'd had over his company, over money, over his behavior with investors. But later, I'd realize he wasn't talking about memories. He was talking about us. After dinner, David and I walked outside. The stars were unbelievably bright. No city lights, no noise, just silence. That's when I noticed Ethan standing by the cliff's edge. His silhouette against the moonlight looked almost peaceful. "Ethan?" I called. He turned around, and for a moment, I saw the little boy who used to hold my hand at the grocery store, who used to ask me if monsters were real. He smiled, and then, without hesitation, he shoved. There was no time to scream, only wind, only gravity pulling us down. My hand found David's instinctively. The cliff wasn't a straight drop. It sloped sharply, rocks and shrubs breaking our fall. Pain exploded everywhere, my shoulder, my ribs, my leg. I landed hard, the air knocked out of me. The world went black for a second. When I opened my eyes, David was beside me, his face pale but alive. I heard footsteps above us, Ethan. He was looking down, scanning for movement. I knew that if he saw us breathe, he'd come down to finish it. David turned his head slowly toward me, blood running down his temple, and whispered, "Pretend we're dead." I stopped breathing. My body went still. Above, Ethan waited. Then, his voice. "Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Dad." His footsteps faded away. That night, under the cold stars, we stayed there, unmoving, broken, and alive. When I woke, dawn had painted the sky pink. Every breath hurt. David was conscious but bleeding badly. We were at least 40 feet below the ridge, half hidden by rocks and trees. From above, we must have looked lifeless. "We have to move," I whispered. "He'll come back to make sure." But David couldn't. His leg was shattered, maybe his ribs too. So I did what I had to, tore my jacket into strips, tied his wounds, and started looking for a way up. Every inch upward felt like climbing through betrayal. Every rock, every thorn, every heartbeat said the same thing. "Your son tried to kill you." By the time I reached the top, the cabin was silent. The SUV was gone. Ethan had left. I stood there shaking. There were still 2 coffee mugs on the porch, one for me, one for him. They were still warm. That's when the first tear fell, not because of the pain, but because somewhere inside me, a voice whispered, "You created this." I went back down to David and helped him hide in a hollow beneath a fallen tree. We needed rest, food, and a plan. The nearest town was miles away, and we couldn't risk calling anyone. Ethan controlled too much. His company, his connections, his money, all of it. He'd made sure to silence us permanently because of what we knew. David had discovered it by accident, financial crimes, embezzlement, maybe even worse. Ethan's startup wasn't just failing, it was dirty. He'd been laundering money through shell investors, and David had confronted him. I thought it could be solved. I thought he'd come clean. But that night on the mountain, Ethan made his choice, and now it was time for us to make ours. The first 2 days were survival. David's condition worsened, and I rationed what little food we had. Granola bars, a single bottle of water I'd found near the cliff's base. My phone was shattered. His was gone. But I had something Ethan didn't know. Memory. I remembered every password he'd ever used, every hint of his arrogance, every weakness he thought I never noticed. He inherited my intelligence, but not my patience. That would be his undoing. On the third morning, I found an old hunter's path that led down toward a service road. It took hours, but I made it, limping, filthy, exhausted. A truck driver found me and took me to a small hospital in Boulder. When they asked what happened, I said, an accident, because David was still up there, hidden, and until I knew Ethan's next move, no one could know the truth. That night, in the hospital bed, I borrowed a nurse's phone and checked the news. There it was, a headline that nearly stopped my heart. Tragic accident. Local couple presumed dead after fall near Bear Ridge. Ethan had already filed the report. There were even statements from him, interviews, tears, photographs. He played the grieving son perfectly. And the world believed him, but I didn't cry. Because in that moment, something inside me changed. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a ghost with unfinished business, and ghosts don't rest. For 3 days, I stayed in that hospital bed, pretending to be a survivor of a hiking accident. They treated my wounds, gave me food, and asked for family contacts. I gave them a fake name, Claradine, because if Ethan knew I was alive, everything would end before it began. David was still up there in the woods, hidden in the hollow beneath that tree, waiting for me to come back. I couldn't reach him yet, not until I secured a way to protect us both. The nurses said I was lucky to be alive. They had no idea how wrong they were. Once I was stable enough to walk, I left the hospital in borrowed clothes and found a cheap motel outside Boulder. I sat by the window all night, watching cars pass, my mind looping that moment at the cliff, Ethan's face, his voice, his cold goodbye. How could a son's eyes look like that? How could the boy I'd kissed goodnight become the man who wanted me dead? Somewhere in that endless replay, the pain started to turn into something else. Focus. I didn't need guns or threats. I just needed to understand Ethan the way only a mother could. He always had a weakness for attention. From childhood, he loved being admired, first for his grades, then for his startup. He needed to be seen, to be praised, and that's what I would use. I started by finding everything about his company, Greyline Innovations, through public records and old connections. His company was in the tech sector, supposedly developing privacy software for corporations. In reality, David had discovered it was a facade, money laundering, offshore accounts, manipulation of government contracts. If I could prove that, Ethan's empire would crumble. But first, I had to make him trust the silence. I stayed off the grid for a week, let the world mourn us. The news coverage went quiet. Ethan went back to his perfect life, interviews, social events, charitable donations in our memory. I watched from afar, hidden in the noise of the city. At night, I called the ranger station anonymously, checking on the Bear Ridge area. No discovery reports yet. David was still hidden, still safe, but he was weak and time was running out. By the second week, I made my first move. I created a new identity, Elena Moore, a freelance consultant from Portland. Using a burner laptop, I registered a clean email and began contacting small investors linked to Greyline, pretending to be a corporate investigator interested in potential acquisition data. Ethan had no idea how many little cracks he'd left open in his empire. Greedy people talk. Disgruntled employees leak. All I had to do was listen. Every file I gathered was another piece of the puzzle. Evidence of fraud, fake shell corporations, and even one silent partner who didn't exist. But my biggest find came from a woman named Lydia Chen, Ethan's executive assistant. She'd left the company 2 months before the accident. Her exit was quiet, but her online resume hinted she knew too much. I reached out under my alias, pretending to be a journalist writing a book about Silicon Valley scandals. Lydia agreed to meet a quiet cafe in downtown Los Angeles. I flew there on a gray morning, still wearing a wig and tinted glasses. The city felt alien after the mountains, all noise and neon. Lydia was younger than I expected, sharp eyes, careful posture. When I asked about Ethan, her expression shifted. "I don't want trouble," she said softly. "He's powerful. I just want the truth," I said. "What kind of man is he?" She looked at me for a long time before whispering, "He doesn't believe people exist, only utilities. Once you're no longer useful, you disappear." A chill ran down my spine. Then she told me about the shell accounts, the off-the-books transactions, and something darker, a private research contract with a defense subcontractor. Ethan wasn't just stealing money, he was stealing information. Before I left, Lydia hesitated. He said once that his parents were liabilities, that they couldn't be trusted. I felt my heart stop. Liabilities. That was what we were to him. I left the cafe and walked aimlessly through the streets of LA, tears burning my eyes. But beneath the heartbreak, a strange calm began to rise. If he wanted to erase us, then I'd let him, because what better weapon than a ghost? That night, I reached a deserted parking lot behind an abandoned diner, opened my laptop, and began compiling everything: emails, invoices, account trails. Every piece connected to Ethan like a web. I wasn't ready to strike yet. I needed him to see his own destruction before it happened, to feel it coming. So I sent my first message from a secure, anonymous server. One line only. You should have looked down before you walked away. No signature. No name. The next day, Greyline's private email servers registered a breach attempt. Security systems scrambled, and Ethan panicked. I watched him through news footage. At a charity event, his smile was tense, his eyes darting. For the first time, he didn't look untouchable. That's when I knew the plan was working. I wasn't haunting him with ghosts. I was haunting him with guilt. Back in Boulder, I made my way up the mountain again, supplies in my backpack, determination in my veins. When I reached the hollow, David was weak but alive. His eyes widened when he saw me. You made it, he whispered. We're not dead yet, I said softly, taking his hand. But soon he'll wish we were. For the next few days, we built our recovery. I told David everything: the fake identity, Lydia, the files. He listened, quiet and steady. When I told him about the message, he looked at me for a long time and said, "You've become someone I don't recognize." Good, I replied. Neither will he. That night, under the flicker of a campfire, I crafted the next stage. Ethan would receive another email, this time with an attached file, one of his own stolen contracts, doctored to appear as if an anonymous insider was leaking everything. I ended the message with another line: "You can bury bodies, Ethan, but truth doesn't stay buried." The panic spread. Within days, Greyline stock fell 8%. Investors demanded answers. Ethan blamed cyber attacks. Behind the scenes, I began feeding small bits of truth to reporters through encrypted messages, fake tip accounts, ghost servers. And every time I sent one, I whispered into the darkness, "This is for every lie you told." There's a peculiar hunger that takes over when you realize you have what the other person most fears: certainty. Before, I hunted for proof. Now I hunted for something worse: the internal collapse that comes when a proud man watches everything he built disintegrate, because the world finally sees the pattern he'd spent years hiding. Ethan's first mistakes were small, childish almost. He stopped sleeping well. He took meetings in glass conference rooms and glared at the skyline as if the horizon itself had betrayed him. He snapped at employees over trivial things. He deleted calendar entries. He began to trust fewer faces. That's what I wanted, a narrowing of the world. People panic when the map they've always used to navigate life is erased. They claw at it, and in the clawing they reveal the seams. I fed him seams. It was never enough to show him the web. He had to feel the web cutting in. I started with people closest to him. The assistant, Lydia, had been fragile at first. The kind of woman who keeps receipts in a tidy stack and apologizes for breathing too loudly. But she'd carried more than mice and secrets. She'd carried shame and fear. With patience, not threats, I turned that fear into courage. Ethan doesn't see people, I said to her the day we met again. We sat in the same cafe, the cup of coffee between us cooling against the porcelain like a clock running out. He sees utility. He misunderstands love for leverage. He thinks everyone has a function in his plan. Her hands trembled around her cup. He's charming, she said. He saved my father's medical bills. He was generous. The words had the mechanical cadence of someone repeating a script. She wanted to believe the story she told herself. You were useful, I said softly. He rewarded you. And when you stopped being useful, you left. She nodded. I left before I stopped being useful. The admission was a fracture. From Lydia came names and dates and a folder with an old encrypted backup she'd downloaded on her last day. It wasn't much, an internal memo about a contingency client and an account number that lit up like a match in the night, but it connected Greyline to a shell contractor that existed only on paper. I took that folder and washed it in context. A court case from 3 years prior, a shell company merger flagged in a small business bulletin, a subcontract paid by a defense contractor. Every cross-reference engraved a line on the ledger of guilt. But cross-references aren't collapse. Collapse is personal. Collapse is watching a man lose the rhythm of his life. So I called a PR firm pretending to be an investor, asking about transparency and ethics. I used fake profiles to seed worry into financial groups. I placed misleading whispers through private investor chats. Has anyone verified the new lead on Gray Line's defense contracts? The rumor economy is vicious. It eats reputations for breakfast. Meanwhile, David recovered, slowly and stubbornly. Each time the door to the little hollow creaked, and he shuffled out like a man returning from sleep. My chest clenched with equal measure guilt and pride. He had been the one to find the first misdirection in Ethan's books. Now he listened to my updates and tutored me on how to read accounting statements like a man reads the weather. "You're too cruel," he told me once by the lantern light, and the words were not reproach exactly. They were wonder. "You're becoming an artist of revenge. Then I better learn brushstrokes," I replied. The next stage was intimate and surgical. I needed to infiltrate the circles where Ethan drank his ego, the charity dinners, the boardrooms, the investor salons, and plant inside him a quiet terror, betrayal from within. If an internal ally turned, the house of cards would fold with perfect, humiliating precision. There's a way to appear harmless and still act like a scalpel. I became a wraith of compliments and gentle questions. I sat in the back rows of panel discussions, listening. I cultivated an identity as a small-time philanthropist, a woman who admired the idea of tech solving human problems. I asked about transparency in Q&A lines, turned my voice into a mirror that reflected his bravado back at him. He noticed the mirror, stroked it, and assumed it worshipped, the single most dangerous assumption a predator makes. I also began to send him messages, small, anonymous, the kind that prickle where pride lives. A photograph placed into an investor's inbox. Lydia's photo with a time-stamped message showing her handing a black envelope to a man connected to the shell contractor. A screenshot sent to a small-town journalist. "Have you ever checked Gray Line subcontractors?" A call that implied that an insider might be ready to talk. He reacted with the violence of someone who'd been told the foundation of his life was termite-eaten. First, angry emails to his legal team. Then a public statement of confidence that read like a declaration of war. By the time he upped security and lawyers, the panic had already eaten the margins of his control. What surprised me was the tenderness that still clung to him in private moments. I watched videos of him at night, old speeches, interviews he'd given, small clips that showed who he pretended to be when he thought no one watched. He was still the charming boy my husband and I had once known. He could laugh with a sudden openness that made me remember changing diapers and sending him off to college with a hand tremor I denied for weeks. This is the paradox of revenge. You punish the monster and you find a child inside him who you once loved. It lances the heart in ways I hadn't predicted, but that pain only made my resolve sharper. You cannot dismantle a man like Ethan with sentiment. You must be a surgeon. Weeks bled into months. Gray Line hemorrhaged credibility. Board members called each other in corridors. Investors pulled back. A leak to a major financial outlet suggested that Gray Line's defense subcontractor billed millions for services that never existed. The company's stock plummeted, and my nameless emails became the echo chamber for an avalanche of suspicion. Ethan's arrogance turned inward. He stopped trusting his closest advisors. He called Lydia in a tantrum live on speaker to berate her for disloyalty in a thin voice that barely concealed the tremor of fear. She hung up and sobbed into the closed bathroom door. She later came to me and said, "He told me something I still remember, that if you betray him, he will make sure no one remembers your name." Her small body shook with the memory. "Then let him try," I said, and then we both began to laugh. A brittle sound, the echo of people who had learned to fight with the only weapon left, memory. My next move was cunning. I arranged a private gala under the guise of a new foundation, the Summit for Ethical AI, pitched as a neutral space for leaders to explore innovation with responsibility. Naturally, Ethan RSVPED, these people love platforms. They live for applause. The invite list was a constellation of his peers, investors, rivals, and a journalist I'd strategically nudged earlier. I paid for the hall. I wrote the speeches. I called the caterers under a fake alias. Elena Moore was becoming an industry ghost. On the night of the gala, Ethan walked in to applause. The room shimmered with chandeliers, polite smiles, and wine that slides down the throat like a lie. He took the stage and began to talk about transparency and vision, words that tasted stale in a room already sour with suspicion. He was excellent at performance. He had to be. It was one of his currencies. Midway through his keynote, the lights dimmed under the pretense of a presentation, theatrics to underscore his talk on illumination and truth. Only the screen behind him did not display his slide deck. It showed his documents, invoices, subcontract drafts, ledger entries. The music that rose was not applause. It was silence sharpened into a blade. Ethan froze mid-sentence, his jaw set like a trap. He looked at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. The crowd murmured. The camera zoomed. The journalist I'd placed in the second row raised his phone, live stream. He had staged things perfectly for himself for years. The perfect irony is when the stage collapses under you. For the first time, I saw him not as predator, but as a man recognized in the full nakedness of his deeds. He scanned the room, and his eyes found Lydia. Her face was pale as paper. He mouthed a curse that was almost prayer. He wanted to call security. He wanted to accuse. He wanted the law and its solemnity to smooth him. His lawyer lunged forward to confiscate the feed. Ethan tried to spin a narrative, but the documents were already out. The leak was surgical, with metadata pointing not to a disgruntled employee, but to a secure insider server that had only allowed access from within the company's own subnet. I had set the breadcrumbs there months ago, nudging a junior IT guy into a poor security ritual, referencing an unsecured backup in a throwaway email. When he followed that breadcrumb to fix it, my script told me everything I needed to know. That junior tech became the unwitting actor who, under pressure, would turn to an investigator. The press found him, he spilled, and the software trace led back to Greyline and then, inexorably, to Ethan. He was mercilessly undone in public. The fallout was exquisite in its precision. Investors held emergency calls. The board convened. His phone became a litany of threats from angry clients and whispered pleas from former friends. On live TV, he attempted to sound stoic, but his voice cracked. And in the ruins of those days, I learned something about revenge. It is not always righteous. Sometimes it is a mirror held up to a human being until the reflection breaks them. I had held that mirror. I had made it shatter. But as the shards fell, a new danger crept in. Ethan did not only have enemies outside. He had people inside him who could become desperate enough to lash out. He had pride and resources and a kind of stupid loyalty that transformed victims into weapons. And then there were the legal routes, defamation suits, countersuits, and lawyers trained to bury truth in procedure. I had to be careful. I had to be clever. The most savage thing I could do was not to destroy him physically, but to leave him hollowed and watched by everyone he once controlled. That is how pride is most painfully taught, in the public stripping of certainty. On a raw morning, after one of the worst headlines, I visited David in the hollow. He had made himself a crude shelter out of branches and tarps. He smiled when he saw me, but there was a new look in his eyes, not weakness, something like readiness. He will come for blood, he said quietly. Or for something worse, his own sanity. He already is coming apart, I replied. We must be ready for the next moves. We mapped possible retaliation routes, then planted small traps of our own. My plan was never to kill him. I wanted him to watch his world fragment and to be forced to reckon with every face he had used. But you cannot stage justice without risk. Powerful men like Ethan have ways of punching through the noise. The final act would require more than anonymous emails and public shame. He needed to feel the loneliness of the murderer he had tried to be. He needed one person closest to him to peel away. That person, the one I needed most, was not a board member or a journalist. It was someone who would cleave him in private, the one human being who still carried the possibility of love for him. I spoke to Lydia in careful sentences and asked the question I'd been preparing to ask all along. Would you be willing to go back, briefly, for one last performance? She looked like someone trying to decide whether to step into a fire to warm someone she once trusted. I can't, she whispered. I'm too scared. You're not the same woman, I told her. This is not for revenge for you. This is for others. For the small names in his ledger. For the families he used. She hesitated, then nodded. Courage is a peculiar contagion. Once you see someone else risk, your fear can shrink. The trap we designed was psychological and intimate. A private meeting in a neutral location. A penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows. The kind of view that makes men think they are above consequence. Lydia would meet Ethan and, coaxed with the right lines, reveal the pain a broken reputation brings. The encounter would be recorded, Not to blackmail, but to let him watch his own face, while someone he once trusted expressed the disgust that his actions deserved. I would be the hand nudging the hour. The night before the meeting, I slept badly. I dreamt of the cliff, the wind like a voice, David's whispered command to pretend we were dead, Ethan's expression as he walked away. Dreams are messengers. They tell you what you will become. In the sunlit morning, I packed my things and touched the worn place on my arm where the rope had cut into me. The rope of rage and the rope of restraint were braided together. Only careful steps would unwind them without knotting irreparably. When Lydia texted me the confirmation of the meeting, I felt a presence behind my ribs, not exactly triumph, more like the precise hush before pulling a thread that will unpick the whole sweater. I had taught myself patience. I had set the world in a pattern and then watched the pattern loosen. Now the next step would be close and ugly and intimate. It would demand me to be small and large at once, invisible enough to be ignored, visible enough to be meaningful. This was the part that every mother fears, the hour of decision where you must choose whether to hold to what you loved or to let go and let the world take its miserable justice. I chose justice, and I chose to make him watch the fall, piece by piece. There is a particular cruelty in silence. When you choose not to scream, the other person has to fill the void themselves. They invent arguments, they mock themselves in the empty rooms they once owned, and eventually, they begin to hear the lies they told so often they believe them. Lydia told me later that she called Ethan in the afternoon, hands trembling so much her voice cracked. She said she would meet him one last time because she owed the truth to herself, to the people she'd helped cover for, and to the memory of a conscience that still ached inside her. She said she wanted him to look at what he had built and see what it had cost him. The evening was cold and glassy. The penthouse they chose belonged to a friend of mine, an old contact from a charity board who owed me a favor I redeemed with patience and an empty smile. The view from the windows made every man who sat behind a desk feel godlike. It was the theater in which the powerful rehearse their illusions. Lydia arrived first, breath fogging in the foyer. She looked smaller than I expected, a woman who'd been polished by corporate life but cracked at the seams. I slipped her a small recorder and a water bottle. "You don't have to say everything," I told her. "Just answer the question why, would that be enough?" When Ethan walked in, he moved as though he owned the light. He hugged Lydia, made jokes about the city, and then, naturally, as if it were a rehearsed move, he asked about getting back together with the foundation, about restructuring donations, about appearances. He spoke in polished sentences, lines designed for cameras and compromise. Lydia waited. She listened until the moment he relaxed, when his guard thinned like a badly hung curtain. Then she began. "It's not about what you gave," she said. "It's about what you took." Her voice was low, and for the first time in months, someone spoke to him without flattery. "You taught me that loyalty is transactional. When you need me, I'm an asset. When you don't, I'm invisible." He blinked, surprise flickering across his face. Not anger first, but confusion, like someone trying to reframe the equation he'd always solved with profit and loss. He asked for examples. She named dates, contracts, the veneer of their charity, funneling funds into subcontracts that never completed work. She told him about the nights she watched ledgers that had no justification and the men who received checks and disappeared. He scoffed at first. "You exaggerate," he said, the practiced lawyer's dodge. Then he tried to charm. Jokes, deflection, a smile to the room that fell flat. Lydia's voice stayed steady. She told him, as the recorder captured breath and pause, that she had proof and that she was willing to hand it to the right people. She told him, finally, that she had watched families ruined, small nonprofits that had taken a pittance and been promised the world. He only saw numbers, she saw names. As she spoke, I watched him shrink under the weight of the faces she described. It is one thing to be criticized in print. It is another to have a person you once trusted stand across from you and call you out for the human cost of your choices. When the recording stopped, Ethan was pale. He had the look of a man for whom the scenery had turned into a courtroom. He tried to bargain. He offered money, apologies, threats, the usual litany a desperate man uses when the machinery grinds. Lydia countered with calm. You can pay me, Ethan, and I'll disappear. Or I can let this be heard. I don't want to be in your orbit anymore. She slid the recorder into a small velvet box and left it on the table like an insult. What she did not know, and what I had engineered, was that the moment she left, I did something small and invisible. I uploaded the recording to a dozen secure servers and sent the link to a select list: investigative journalists, a few trusted regulators, and an investor who'd been quietly anxious for weeks. The recording had a modest preface, testimony from an internal source, audio evidence attached, no name. No hint of the mother waiting in the wings. At midnight, the first outlet published a short piece. Insider alleges moral bankruptcy at Greyline Innovations. The article led with a quote from Lydia, embedded the audio, and included a cautious line about pending investigations. It was enough. Enough to make the headlines broaden, enough to make the boardroom lights flicker and the lawyers pace. Ethan's reaction was the kind of animal honesty you rarely see on polished TV interviews. He called Lydia and threatened her in a voice that trembled between fury and pleading. He contacted his PR team and legal counsel and launched a full-scale effort to discredit the source. He accused her of blackmail, of lying. He released statements about transparency, about cooperating with inquiries, about his lifelong dedication to ethics. The performance was textbook, but the truth has its own persistence. People who are lied to for so long begin to see through the sheen. Investors smell instability the way sailors smell rot below deck. The first major backer issued a cautious statement about reviewing the relationship with Greyline. Stock dipped steadily. The board convened emergency meetings. Ethan grew ragged. He'd always been color drunk, gorging on praise and attention, two things that now arrived in bloody fragments. He began to isolate. The friends who had once orbited him retreated politely, their calls thin with apologies. A few called to ask his side, and then afterwards called me through anonymous lines to say they'd never felt certain about his accounting. Their language was careful, frightened. Guilt, it turns out, is contagious. 2 weeks later, the legal action arrived, not against Lydia, but against Greyline itself. A small defense contractor that had never done work filed a suit when an investigator discovered they'd been sent a check. The suit looked messy, and suits are teeth in paper. They bite when the money-tide recedes. The cascade had started, and I watched it from the sidelines like someone watching a storm over a map. And yet none of that gave me the satisfaction I expected. Watching him unravel was one thing. Watching him claim the high ground when he had sold it was another. The part of me that remembered his lullabies and scraped knees felt a phantom ache, a tug to the life that was lost beneath the man he had become. That ache I did not allow to rule me. Instead, I used it to sharpen the edges of my will. Ethan began to lash out in quieter, more dangerous ways. He sought people I'd spoken to, trying to trace the leak. He hired private investigators to comb through records, to find the ghost contacting journalists, to identify the nameless force that had begun undoing him. He started to cast about in the twilight between revenge and paranoia, and in that twilight you are most vulnerable. One morning, as the sun spilled weak through the motel blinds, I opened an email with a single line. We found someone asking about you. He asked to know who you were last night in Boulder. He knows enough to ask about Elena Moore. My heart slowed. I had been careful. I never met the journalists I contacted. But the world has a way of catching even the smallest moths that flutter too close to the flame. A private investigator had been hired. He was sniffing at Elena Moore like a hound. He could find the motel. He could find the hospital records. That slow, careful smell would lead him to David if I wasn't faster. I made a decision in the span of a single breath. You do not outwit a man like Ethan by playing only with data sheets and whispers. You have to be the story you want told. I called Lydia. We need to stage a sighting, I said. On your terms, she protested. We can't put ourselves in his path. I understood the danger, but I also understood that fear is a tool if you hold it patiently. She agreed. We arranged for a public appearance in a small but visible piazza in Santa Monica, an innocuous place where cameras and phones are always plentiful. Lydia would appear to be a bystander, someone who had nothing to lose and everything to tell. She would cry, she would speak, she would give a face to the recording he claimed was fake. And she would do it not as a martyr, but as an actress liberated from fear. When the day came, cameras turned, phones lifted. The same journalists I'd seated were waiting. Lydia walked into the light and gave an interview that threaded pity and courage in a way that made people listen. She told the story, named a few facts, spoke of moral consequences. The clip went viral within hours. Ethan reacted like a man flung from a cliff, scrambling legal teams, raw anger, whispers of lawsuits. He called for a meeting with key board members and begged them to stand by him. A few did. Many did not. And then the final psychological blow I planned, one that would not ruin him financially overnight, but which would plant a persistent rot in his private life. I arranged for a small package to be delivered to his home address during his evening. A physical thing, tangible, personal. Inside the box was a bundle of childhood memorabilia, a faded photograph of a little boy holding a trophy, a small wooden airplane David had made years ago, and a note in a child's scrawl that read, "You won't forget, will you?" The note had been faked. I'd hired a handwriting analyst to mimic the looping letters of his childhood. The package was anonymous. Ethan opened it in his home office. He called his assistant first, not with questions, but with a voice that sounded incredulous. "Who would send this?" he demanded. The assistant, already wobbling on the precipice of loyalty, stammered and then suggested it could be a stunt. But the package did what intended. It pried a thread of memory loose. He stared at the photograph, and I imagined something inside him flinched, not guilt at first, but the weird sensation a man has when his childhood returns like a ghost. Smallness, the recognition that someone once loved him without calculation. Anger and grief are two sides of the same coin, and he clutched both. In the weeks that followed, he grew quieter, more brittle. He locked doors, he deleted numbers. He watched the world like a man who expects betrayal in every coffee cup. I had not wanted to return to the cliff scene in my mind. But now, in the echo of his private panic and public disgrace, it came back more often, the instant his hand left us, the noise, his voice saying goodbye. I wanted him to remember it the same way I did, as a clean, conscious choice. Which is why I saved the last, most intimate act for later. For now, I let the public crumble and the private unravel. I let investors and lawyers and journalists do the work that legally would break him. I let Lydia speak and the world listen. I let a childhood photograph reinsert the pain he'd tried to anesthetize. Revenge is not only about making the proud fall. It is about making them watch the fall from a place where they cannot return. And as the city moved in its restless orbit, I prepared the final movement, the piece that would make him understand not only that he had lost the world, but that the people he had tried to erase were still alive, waiting in the dark with the names of everyone he had used. There is a strange arithmetic to revenge. You add discomfort, subtract certainty, divide loyalties, and multiply doubt until the equation that once made a man proud no longer balances. It is a slow math, cruel and precise, and every step demands patience. By now, Ethan's life was a house of windows with tinting scraped off. He moved through rooms that no longer had his failures. Colleagues who had once kissed his ring finger read headlines with the same fingers that traced his name in meeting minutes. Investors who had once called late to ask for his advice now asked his counsel only to prepare their own exits. Still, he moved like a man who trusted that motion would disguise unmoored foundations. He gave interviews with a cadence meant to sound steady. He met with lawyers in glass towers. He issued press releases with the kind of language that promised transparency while delaying it in legal clouds. He hired forensic teams and private counsel and threatened lawsuits with the mechanical fury of someone who assumes money fixes everything. He began to talk about rebuilding trust, a phrase like a prayer offered by someone who had never believed in prayer. I watched from the edges. I learned his rhythms more completely than anyone had the right to. I learned when he drank coffee black, when he skipped it, when the tremor hit under his left eye anxiety's small handprint. I timed the cadence of his spokespeople and the pattern of his Instagram posts. Revenge requires intelligence, yes, but it also requires an inventory of weakness. The next move had to be surgical and intimate. Public ruin would hollow him, but he would still have allies, still have walls. I needed to take something deeper, his certainty about what he deserved, the soft place he kept for himself, the idea that a mother would never be the one to name him a monster. I arranged a meeting through a new conduit, someone I'd cultivated in the legal press. A short piece about ailed charities and phantom contractors had opened the door. Small nonprofits now had reason to testify. I offered the press a collection of profiles, families who had been promised jobs and payments that never came. I told them the stories of the small victims. The journalists dug and called me, not as Claire or Elena, but as the woman who would lie in the shadow and speak when others were too afraid. I fed them carefully chosen narratives, names, dates, the exact wording of invoices. Little details are the bones journalists use to create skeletons of truth. Then I did the cruelest thing. I sent Ethan a package with no return address. Inside there was a thin stack of letters, handwritten, from parents and wives who had been affected by the phantom contracts. I had retyped and anonymized their handwriting to protect identities, but not the message. People still hurt. Each letter was a small legal truth. A canceled check, a photograph of an empty classroom where equipment had been promised, a child who had not received promised support. He opened the package in private. I imagined his hands folding each page, the room's light washing his face in a way that made every line, every crease visible. For a time, he looked like a man who had just learned a grammar of guilt. Then, as if ashamed, he shoved the papers into a drawer and tried to sleep. But sleep had left him. From then on, the letters were a restless whisper at the edges of his mind. Around that time, his behavior grew more erratic. He called investors and screamed at them for betrayals that were simply consequences. He phoned lawyers and demanded impossible things. He begged board members to stand with him and then castigated them when they did. He became a man, tethered to panic. The more he fought to hold on, the further the world backed away. The final act needed to be a mirror held to someone he loved. My husband, David, had suggested it almost in prayer. Force him to feel what he had tried to force us to feel. He proposed a staged encounter, not public, but intimate enough to break the illusion that some people might still see him as redeemable. We found her by accident and by design, a woman named Rosa, a small-time organizer who tried to run a health clinic that Gray Lane's phantom contracts had promised to fund. The clinic had closed when the money vanished. The children in that town had been left without care. Rosa had read the public statements and felt the slow, awful turning of the gears. She accepted my call without hesitation. What anger she had contained was not the froth of scandal, but the rawness of those who had lost things that can't be bought back. We staged a meeting at one of Ethan's lesser-known satellite offices, a glass room with a view out to the harbor, where he sometimes took calls he wanted to feel important. Rosa entered, small and exact, carrying a file. Ethan sat across the table, wary, a man who expected either praise or fawning. Someone had told him something about reconciliation, the way predators expect flocking. What he didn't expect was the softness of an ordinary woman who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Rosa spoke plainly. She told him details, names of children who missed treatments, the teacher who repainted her classroom without reimbursements, the elderly volunteer who had mortgaged the family home to keep a clinic open until a check arrived and never did. She did not move toward him with a legal sword. She moved toward him with the weight of people whose lives had suffered the gravity wells of his decisions. As she spoke, her voice did not accuse with fury so much as hold up a ledger of consequence. He shifted in his seat, powers of rationalization trying to reframe the human as transaction. But there was no number for the look on his face when she named the child who had cried and whose father spent a week calling the number that had once guided hope. Something small and private in him collapsed, recognition without mitigation. He could not buy this away. Later, alone, Ethan called his assistant and said simply, "I never meant, but there are things you cannot mean into being." The words spilled out like peas. They meant little in the face of the ledger of lives. That night, I watched from a distance as he walked through his home and touched photographs, the slow mechanical gestures of a man trying to find a center that had been scooped away. He paused in an upstairs room and looked at a photograph of himself laughing with a small boy. In the background of the image was a blurred woman making a sandwich. For a moment, his face was a landscape of all the choices that had led to the cliff. The next morning, his lawyer called a press conference in an attempt to regain narrative control. He wanted to frame Ethan as a victim, a man attacked by shadowy forces who intended to manipulate him into ruin. He hired the best PR and preached about false allegations and cyber attacks. But the human stories had teeth. Reality has the bad habit of sticking to skin. And yet, the man still wanted to fight. He still sent out threats and warnings. He even tried to approach me through third parties, attempts that failed because I had become careful as a priest in a temple. He wanted to make me the figurehead of whatever he believed was a conspiracy to ruin him. He wanted me to react. I did not. Instead, I continued to methodically destabilize the map he used to navigate the world. I made investors question audits. I made executives wonder about their loyalty. I placed small, verifiable facts in 3 different outlets with enough cross-references to make the search engines pick them up like a pattern. People began to talk, and talk hard. The board had emergency votes. The stock market, always a fickle oracle, punished a company unable to produce coherent explanations. There is a loneliness that revenge does not acknowledge, the absence of a shared past that once held a person up. Sometimes, after the emails and after the meetings, I would sit and remember the boy who'd learned to ride a bike on the driveway and how his knees had skinned on the cement. I remembered the soft way he used to fall asleep at my feet with a book in his hands. These memories were heavy. They made me feel a human ache that could have undone everything if I let it. But grief is a battery. It can power you or paralyze you. I chose to let it power me, to let the boy I had raised be the reason and the instrument. Ethan, cornered and losing, made a cowardly yet cunning decision. He leaked a private video clip to a sympathetic channel, something intimate but framed to suggest he was being persecuted. In the clip, he spoke about his father and the pressure he'd faced growing up, and then slipped into blame, a quiet insinuation that anyone who attacked him was attacking his family. It was a gambit to return sympathy. It landed with a dull thud in the public mind, stirring some who had once loved him to question the speed of their judgments. But it also gave me an opening. I found a way to let that gambit carry him into the very thing he feared most, exposure in private. He had always guarded one room fiercely, the office library at his country home, where he kept things not for show but for memory. He kept journals there, loose notes, things people only read once in a life and then forget. If he wanted sympathy, he would need to show his humanity. Here's the truth. People who want sympathy often reveal the hand that was once clean. I arranged, with a small team of trusted journalists and a careful legal process, for that office to be searched under a subpoena related to the other contractors. The search uncovered artifacts, notebooks with ledger lines, a list of names, and shorthand that only an insider would use. Those notebooks were not public relations gold. They were DNA, the thinking of a man who'd rationalized decisions he'd never told the world. When excerpts were released, his panic was total. He lashed out, trying to bury the material with lawsuits alleging illegal search and privacy violation. Legal labyrinths were one thing. Moral exposure was another. The notebooks were not as definitive as a court might like, but they were narrative ruin. They showed methods, shorthand, the cold calculus of a man who'd separated humans from transactions. At some point, in the thicket of calls and staff resignations and subpoenas, Ethan's phone call to his mother, my mother-in-law, leaked into a recording. He spoke to her in a tone that was not for cameras, pleading, imploring, and startlingly afraid. It was the sound of a man who had never been fully alone with the consequences of his choices. She, like many, had loved him in the ways mothers love. She tried to speak in soothing riddles. He begged for coaching on a defense narrative. That conversation changed nothing legally. It changed everything privately. Love had not abandoned him. It had simply grown complicated and, for many, conditional. People who once bowed now questioned. Those who once promised had their armor dented by the evidence and by the ledger of small, precise human stories I had been leaving in the world. And as the weeks folded into a bruised season, a strange quiet settled, not peace, not reconciliation. The quiet of a man who knows he has been named. It is here, in the quiet, that the final scene will bloom. Not as spectacle, not as a shot or a scream, but as the small reveal of a man asked at last to look in a mirror not shaded by power but clear as truth. The last act must be psychological and irreversible. It must twist the knife of certainty so cleanly the wound cannot be faked. We were ready. There is a strange arithmetic to revenge. You add discomfort, subtract certainty, divide loyalties, and multiply doubt until the equation that once made a man proud no longer balances. It is a slow math, cruel and precise, and every step demands patience. By now, Ethan's life was a house of windows with tinting scraped off. He moved through rooms that no longer had his failures. Colleagues who had once kissed his ring finger read headlines with the same fingers that traced his name in meeting minutes. Investors who had once called late to ask for his advice now asked his counsel only to prepare their own exits. Still, he moved like a man who trusted that motion would disguise unmoored foundations. He gave interviews with a cadence meant to sound steady. He met with lawyers in glass towers. He issued press releases with the kind of language that promised transparency while delaying it in legal clouds. He hired forensic teams and private counsel and threatened lawsuits with the mechanical fury of someone who assumes money fixes everything. He began to talk about rebuilding trust, a phrase like a prayer offered by someone who had never believed in prayer. I watched from the edges. I learned his rhythms more completely than anyone had the right to. I learned when he drank coffee black, when he skipped it, when the tremor hit under his left eye anxiety's small handprint. I timed the cadence of his spokespeople and the pattern of his Instagram posts. Revenge requires intelligence, yes, but it also requires an inventory of weakness. The next move had to be surgical and intimate. Public ruin would hollow him, but he would still have allies, still have walls. I needed to take something deeper, his certainty about what he deserved, the soft place he kept for himself, the idea that a mother would never be the one to name him a monster. I arranged a meeting through a new conduit, someone I'd cultivated in the legal press. A short piece about ailed charities and phantom contractors had opened the door. Small nonprofits now had reason to testify. I offered the press a collection of profiles, families who had been promised jobs and payments that never came. I told them the stories of the small victims. The journalists dug and called me, not as Claire or Elena, but as the woman who would lie in the shadow and speak when others were too afraid. I fed them carefully chosen narratives, names, dates, the exact wording of invoices. Little details are the bones journalists use to create skeletons of truth. Then I did the cruelest thing. I sent Ethan a package with no return address. Inside there was a thin stack of letters, handwritten, from parents and wives who had been affected by the phantom contracts. I had retyped and anonymized their handwriting to protect identities, but not the message. People still hurt. Each letter was a small legal truth. A canceled check, a photograph of an empty classroom where equipment had been promised, a child who had not received promised support. He opened the package in private. I imagined his hands folding each page, the room's light washing his face in a way that made every line, every crease visible. For a time, he looked like a man who had just learned a grammar of guilt. Then, as if ashamed, he shoved the papers into a drawer and tried to sleep. But sleep had left him. From then on, the letters were a restless whisper at the edges of his mind. Around that time, his behavior grew more erratic. He called investors and screamed at them for betrayals that were simply consequences. He phoned lawyers and demanded impossible things. He begged board members to stand with him and then castigated them when they did. He became a man, tethered to panic. The more he fought to hold on, the further the world backed away. The final act needed to be a mirror held to someone he loved. My husband, David, had suggested it almost in prayer. Force him to feel what he had tried to force us to feel. He proposed a staged encounter, not public, but intimate enough to break the illusion that some people might still see him as redeemable. We found her by accident and by design, a woman named Rosa, a small-time organizer who tried to run a health clinic that Gray Lane's phantom contracts had promised to fund. The clinic had closed when the money vanished. The children in that town had been left without care. Rosa had read the public statements and felt the slow, awful turning of the gears. She accepted my call without hesitation. What anger she had contained was not the froth of scandal, but the rawness of those who had lost things that can't be bought back. We staged a meeting at one of Ethan's lesser-known satellite offices, a glass room with a view out to the harbor, where he sometimes took calls he wanted to feel important. Rosa entered, small and exact, carrying a file. Ethan sat across the table, wary, a man who expected either praise or fawning. Someone had told him something about reconciliation, the way predators expect flocking. What he didn't expect was the softness of an ordinary woman who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Rosa spoke plainly. She told him details, names of children who missed treatments, the teacher who repainted her classroom without reimbursements, the elderly volunteer who had mortgaged the family home to keep a clinic open until a check arrived and never did. She did not move toward him with a legal sword. She moved toward him with the weight of people whose lives had suffered the gravity wells of his decisions. As she spoke, her voice did not accuse with fury so much as hold up a ledger of consequence. He shifted in his seat, powers of rationalization trying to reframe the human as transaction. But there was no number for the look on his face when she named the child who had cried and whose father spent a week calling the number that had once guided hope. Something small and private in him collapsed, recognition without mitigation. He could not buy this away. Later, alone, Ethan called his assistant and said simply, "I never meant, but there are things you cannot mean into being." The words spilled out like peas. They meant little in the face of the ledger of lives. That night, I watched from a distance as he walked through his home and touched photographs, the slow mechanical gestures of a man trying to find a center that had been scooped away. He paused in an upstairs room and looked at a photograph of himself laughing with a small boy. In the background of the image was a blurred woman making a sandwich. For a moment, his face was a landscape of all the choices that had led to the cliff. The next morning, his lawyer called a press conference in an attempt to regain narrative control. He wanted to frame Ethan as a victim, a man attacked by shadowy forces who intended to manipulate him into ruin. He hired the best PR and preached about false allegations and cyber attacks. But the human stories had teeth. Reality has the bad habit of sticking to skin. And yet, the man still wanted to fight. He still sent out threats and warnings. He even tried to approach me through third parties, attempts that failed because I had become careful as a priest in a temple. He wanted to make me the figurehead of whatever he believed was a conspiracy to ruin him. He wanted me to react. I did not. Instead, I continued to methodically destabilize the map he used to navigate the world. I made investors question audits. I made executives wonder about their loyalty. I placed small, verifiable facts in 3 different outlets with enough cross-references to make the search engines pick them up like a pattern. People began to talk, and talk hard. The board had emergency votes. The stock market, always a fickle oracle, punished a company unable to produce coherent explanations. There is a loneliness that revenge does not acknowledge, the absence of a shared past that once held a person up. Sometimes, after the emails and after the meetings, I would sit and remember the boy who'd learned to ride a bike on the driveway and how his knees had skinned on the cement. I remembered the soft way he used to fall asleep at my feet with a book in his hands. These memories were heavy. They made me feel a human ache that could have undone everything if I let it. But grief is a battery. It can power you or paralyze you. I chose to let it power me, to let the boy I had raised be the reason and the instrument. Ethan, cornered and losing, made a cowardly yet cunning decision. He leaked a private video clip to a sympathetic channel, something intimate but framed to suggest he was being persecuted. In the clip, he spoke about his father and the pressure he'd faced growing up, and then slipped into blame, a quiet insinuation that anyone who attacked him was attacking his family. It was a gambit to return sympathy. It landed with a dull thud in the public mind, stirring some who'd once loved him to question the speed of their judgments. But it also gave me an opening. I found a way to let that gambit carry him into the very thing he feared most, exposure in private. He had always guarded one room fiercely, the office library at his country home, where he kept things not for show but for memory. He kept journals there, loose notes, things people only read once in a life and then forget. If he wanted sympathy, he would need to show his humanity. Here's the truth. People who want sympathy often reveal the hand that was once clean. I arranged, with a small team of trusted journalists and a careful legal process, for that office to be searched under a subpoena related to the other contractors. The search uncovered artifacts, notebooks with ledger lines, a list of names, and shorthand that only an insider would use. Those notebooks were not public relations gold. They were DNA, the thinking of a man who'd rationalized decisions he'd never told the world. When excerpts were released, his panic was total. He lashed out, trying to bury the material with lawsuits alleging illegal search and privacy violation. Legal labyrinths were one thing. Moral exposure was another. The notebooks were not as definitive as a court might like, but they were narrative ruin. They showed methods, shorthand, the cold calculus of a man who'd separated humans from transactions. At some point, in the thicket of calls and staff resignations and subpoenas, Ethan's phone call to his mother, my mother-in-law, leaked into a recording. He spoke to her in a tone that was not for cameras, pleading, imploring, and startlingly afraid. It was the sound of a man who had never been fully alone with the consequences of his choices. She, like many, had loved him in the ways mothers love. She tried to speak in soothing riddles. He begged for coaching on a defense narrative. That conversation changed nothing legally. It changed everything privately. Love had not abandoned him. It had simply grown complicated and, for many, conditional. People who once bowed now questioned. Those who once promised had their armor dented by the evidence and by the ledger of small, precise human stories I had been leaving in the world. And as the weeks folded into a bruised season, a strange quiet settled, not peace, not reconciliation, the quiet of a man who knows he has been named. It is here, in the quiet, that the final scene will bloom. Not as spectacle, not as a shot or a scream, but as the small reveal of a man asked at last to look in a mirror not shaded by power but clear as truth. The last act must be psychological and irreversible. It must twist the knife of certainty so cleanly the wound cannot be faked. We were ready. I heard the news before he ever said a word. The mountain rescue reports were vague, no remains, no proof, and rumor moved faster than grief. My son thought he had silenced the past, yet every headline, every whisper on the local radio began to sound like my voice echoing back to him. From the cabin window, I could see the lights of his house down in the valley. Every night, one lamp burned until dawn. Guilt doesn't sleep easily. I wanted him to feel the same sleeplessness that had haunted me since the fall. So I began small. A postcard slipped under his door, no name. Only the line, "Nothing stays buried in the snow." A melody from his childhood hummed from an anonymous number at 2 a.m. My handwriting on a grocery list note left in his car. Each gesture gentle, ghost-like, never cruel. He needed to remember before he could understand. Days later, he came to the cliff again, the place where everything had cracked. I watched from the ridge above as he looked down into the ravine, shoulders shaking. He whispered something I couldn't hear, but I felt it, the first thread of remorse tugging loose. Back in town, I left another clue, a photograph of the three of us, folded neatly and slipped into his mailbox. On the back, a single word, "forgive." When he read it, I saw the change. He began talking to the air in his empty kitchen, pacing at night, searching the woods for voices. His guilt was becoming confession. I wasn't doing this for punishment anymore. I wanted truth. I wanted him to face what he'd done and speak it aloud, not to a courtroom, but to the ghosts he'd made of us. The night he finally broke, rain washed down the mountain roads. I stood just beyond his porch light as he shouted into the darkness, "If you're out there, if you're alive, tell me how to fix it." I didn't answer, not yet. The silence was the only justice left. But for the first time, I felt a strange calm. He would keep searching, keep remembering, until the truth became heavier than his fear. And when he was ready, truly ready, I would step into the light, not as a spirit or punishment, but as the mother he'd tried to erase, returning to make him face what love and betrayal had done to both of us. The nights in the mountains had changed. I could feel his restlessness even from miles away. Some nights I'd hear his truck engine climb the ridge, stop, then idle for minutes before turning back down. He was circling the place where the lie had been born. In the quiet of my cabin, I wrote again, not a threat this time, but a memory. "Do you remember the blueberry pie you burned on Father's Day?" The kind of detail only a mother would recall. I left it in an envelope, slipped beneath the wiper of his truck. When he found it, he froze, half smile, half tear. I knew then that his memories were waking. He began talking to the empty house more often. I could see him through the window, pacing, muttering, sometimes laughing softly, sometimes trembling. "Mom wouldn't haunt me," he whispered once, voice cracked. She'd forgive, but then a darker voice rose inside him, the one I could almost hear. "Forgive you for what, Michael? For the shove, or for the silence that followed?" He started leaving lights on in every room, as if brightness could drown the ghosts. The neighbors whispered that grief had finally taken him. I knew better. Guilt was rewriting his heartbeat, turning sleep into interrogation. I would visit town sometimes, hood pulled low, watching him from across the street. The first time he passed me, his eyes lingered, uncertain. Recognition brushed his face like wind there and gone. My chest tightened. For a moment, I almost wanted to tell him the truth, to stop this cruel dance, but then I remembered the cliff, the cold, the way his father's hand had found mine in the dark while he whispered, "Pretend we're dead." I kept my distance. My revenge was not in pain, it was in awareness. He needed to see the mother he buried inside himself. Weeks passed. His journals began to fill again. I knew because he left the curtains open. Pages covered his desk, words scribbled in panic. Dreamed she was standing by the lake. Heard Dad's voice in the wind. They forgive me, or they will. Each confession was a seed, and I watered them carefully with silence. One evening, I found him on the same trail where he'd once walked beside us. He stopped when a shadow crossed his path. He looked up toward my cabin, though he couldn't see me. "Mom?" he said softly, almost pleading. The sound carried through the trees, fragile as forgiveness. I didn't answer. I could not yet. The time for truth was close, but not tonight. He needed one more step into his own darkness before the light could mean anything. That night, I lit a candle in the cabin window, the same way I used to when he was a boy coming home late. From his porch down in the valley, he saw it. I watched him freeze, one hand over his mouth, tears glinting in the glow. He whispered something the wind carried to me. "I'm sorry." And for the first time since the fall, I believed he meant it. The wind was sharp that morning, thin as a blade against my skin. From the ridge, I could see his house, the roof silvered with frost. Weeks had passed since the candlelight night, yet the image of him whispering, "I am sorry," still trembled inside me like an unfinished song. I had waited so long for remorse, for acknowledgement. Now that it had come, I didn't know what to do with it. Every dawn, I'd awake before the sun and walk to the same ledge, the place where the lie began. The rocks still carried our story. My husband's voice still lingered in the wind. Pretend we're dead. But how long can one pretend to be gone while still breathing? Below me, Michael moved through his days like a man waking from a nightmare he couldn't quite remember. He had stopped locking his doors. He left the porch light burning every night. Hope had replaced fear, fragile but alive. I carried the last letter in my coat pocket. It was short, just a few words written in the same hand that once packed his school lunches. The truth does not end with silence. We are what we choose to become after the fall. I could leave it in his mailbox and disappear forever. Let him believe in forgiveness, in miracles, and the mystery of his parents who never truly died yet never truly returned. It would be the cleaner ending. But there was another voice, the one I had ignored for too long. It said, "He is still your son." So I went down the trail. The morning mist curled around me, and each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the valley road, I saw him standing by the fence, coffee mug in hand, staring toward the mountains as if waiting for something he no longer expected. I called his name, softly. Once, he turned. His eyes widened, disbelief cracking into something wordless. The mug fell and shattered. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then he whispered, "Mom?" I nodded. The world went still. No wind, no birds. Just the space between us, full of everything that had been lost. He took one hesitant step forward, then another as though approaching a ghost. "How?" he breathed. "There are questions that don't need answers," I said. My voice surprised me, steady, gentle. "You only need to live differently now." Tears broke from his eyes, raw and unguarded. I know," I interrupted softly. "I thought too." He reached for me and I let him. The embrace wasn't forgiveness, not yet, it was recognition. two souls caught in the same storm, finally facing the same horizon. Behind him, the sunrise spread across the peaks, painting the snow gold. I felt my husband's presence there, warm and still. Maybe he was proud. Maybe he was free. I pulled back and smiled through my tears. "Go home, Michael," I said. "You have a second chance. Don't waste it." He nodded, broken and whole all at once. When he turned away, I stayed at the fence, watching him disappear into the morning light. The past didn't vanish, it softened, like snow melting under a sun that had been gone too long. Some stories don't end with justice or vengeance. They end with a choice. And mine was to let love be the final echo on the mountain,